Hello, listener. So, you like scary movies? Well, it is a creepy night, and with all those crazy lunatics out there, well, you really shouldn't be alone. Ooh, you look so freaked out right now. Now I suggest you listen very carefully. Subscribe to Class Horrorcast, or I'll gut you like a fish. Enjoy the show. I'll be watching.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Class Horrorcast. I'm your host Aran, and on this week's episode we talk to a true master of his craft. William Brent Bell has brought audiences some incredible and immersive storytelling in Stay Alive, The Devil Inside, The Boy, and Brahms 2. He wrote, edited, and directed one of the best takes on werewolves that I have ever seen. His newest movie, Separation, is out now, and he is also finishing work on the long-awaited prequel to 2009's Orphan. Join me as I dive inside the mind of a master of the macabre, as he shares some stories behind his movies, his advice on never giving up, and what to expect when we see Esther on the big screen again. You won't want to miss this one. So can you remember your first, horror movie you ever saw, or your first horror experience?
It's the first. There's definitely like this little few, like Trilogy of Terror. You know, if you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. I remember my sister showed me that, and the doll one. Like I grew up thinking, for about the next 4 years, I was maybe 7 when she showed it to me or something. I don't remember. And it's it was just terrifying. I mean, for me. And in so many ways, that little 30-minute piece had a great way to get into the story with the necklace. You know, she finds the necklace, but like, where's the doll? And I remember as a little kid going, well, that means the doll's alive. And then the crazy doll, it's like, how do you make that scary? But it just was scary, chasing her around for 20 minutes. And then at the very end, if you remember, she's like stabbing the floor, sitting kind of on the floor, waiting for her mother to show up. And then she smiles and has the doll's teeth. And you realize, oh, she's the evil spirit now. But, and for some reason, my whole childhood until I was like 10, I thought that doll was underneath the couch. Like anytime I would sit on a couch, I would think the doll would cut my feet off if I put my feet over the edge of the couch. So I always sat with my feet up until I was way too old to think that. But movies like The Other, not The Others, but The Other, it's like 1974, 1972. Yeah. That was something I saw like on TV or something really, really young that I still just love it. And it just always gives me chills. Halloween definitely was kind of like, as I was a little more aware. I think those movies were shown to me like without me even asking to see them. Yeah. But like Halloween was something that I kind of chose to see. And it's definitely like my, favorite scary movie, and still is. When a Stranger Calls, I remember that first 15 minutes of that always affected me as a kid. So,
yeah, it's funny how people have those experiences, like you mentioned about sitting on the couch, and you would always think that something was gonna. And I had a similar experience with Gremlins of all things, and I had such a bizarre fear of like filing cabinets or a drawer. I think that's is it in the second Gremlins movie? The scene where all the gremlins pop out of the filing cabinets and different things. Honestly, I was a lot older than 10, and I still had that fear. It's strange because I used to ask the question of, what horror movie scared you, but a lot of times people kind of come out with stuff a little bit left field that you wouldn't expect. That may still be scary, but it was something that got them like on the road.
And it's a little moment in a movie that otherwise probably doesn't bother them, but just, some little moment they've never forgotten, which is a weird, cool, with like horror films. It doesn't really translate in other genres too much to where something happens in a movie and you're like, that person's kind of scarred for life, from that little thing. But not in a horrible way, I don't think.
When you were growing up, were you a collector of anything? Movies, figures, anything like that, comics?
Star Wars. Yeah. I mean, if I collected anything, it was that. I didn't I mean, my parents didn't really support me collecting anything. So, strangely, I collected a lot of candy. But yeah, I think like Star Wars figures was the thing as a kid that I probably collected the most.
What about later in life? Do you collect anything now, or do you have any?
Well, I definitely used to collect DVDs.
Yeah.
Like that was my favorite thing to do. Like when I was like bored or depressed or something, to go shop a DVD place here in LA and like come home with a couple of new DVDs and put them in the collection. It was great. That collection's in storage, but I haven't added anything to it in I don't know how many years, over a decade probably. But and well, strangely, Star Wars, it's like I have this big Boba Fett collection I've had for like 20 years. So like all sorts of different busts of him and his like helmets and stuff for like ever. And you know, it's funny because, you know, having made lots of movies, I definitely collect all the stuff from the movies, you know. So I have so much of the film, the props, and all that stuff, more than I could ever put anywhere. That like I'm trying to figure out the best way to, you know, I can see your place. It's like, so that's a pretty. And I especially realized recently that like that is. I realize a fun part of making films is making, you know, it's making things. It's like Brahms designing the doll, and then going, well, I'm going to collect that doll, you know.
That was something I was going to ask. Do you have him?
No, I don't have him. I will, but it's like they required to keep him in storage for the ideas of sequels. So I have like, you can see I've got like the mold of his first head. I don't know if you can see that stuff. And then I've got like the head, the face when it shattered.
Nice.
And I've got like a lot of his stuff's in storage because I just got back from doing that movie and then moved everything into storage. But like Brahms, his weapon that he kills or that he uses at the end of the first Boy movie. I have, you know, stuff like that, just all that stuff.
Yeah.
All the designs. I've got all the, like, I've got maybe 8, you know, models of all the sets over here. That kind of stuff, like I said, after a while, you don't have any place to put it.
Yeah.
But it's like, I'm just like kind of a nerd about all that stuff, you know?
It's funny because I feel like I've tried to, I guess, curate my collection a little bit better because I would just collect anything to do with, especially horror, whether it be DVDs, Blu-rays, vinyls, anything really. And I've definitely noticed a huge shift in the last couple of years to things like you were talking about, props from movies, and I'm part of a couple of communities online, and guys, you know, will seek across the globe for anything and everything from their favorite movies. And I think things like that, I've seen a lot of people ask the question about the Boy, and does anybody have anything, and nobody seems to know. Every now and again, you know, I guess guys like to pretend maybe and say, oh yeah, no, I actually do have them, or I got it from somebody on set. But
well, you know, 4 Brahms dolls, and one of them's destroyed now. But the one that in the first film we had 2, and then we made 2 more, and now we have 3. But the head of the studio, STX, who's not a collector per se, he's had the doll in his office for like 6 years, and about 3 years ago, and I was like, why don't I have, you know, where's my doll? And they promised me they would get it, and then they were like, well, we have to wait. But he got Brian Henson, Jim Henson's son, you know, from you know, Puppeteers. He came in, and then they motorized the doll a little bit. So like if you're in a meeting with this guy at his office, you know, the doll will just barely move, just the tiniest bit, because he has buttons under his desk.
I love that.
That does that. I do too. So I'll definitely do that, you know, at some point. But you know, all these types of things, sometimes they shift and they move on their own. So I think that's definitely what I want to do is animatronic, make the animatronic a little bit.
Looking back, I guess on The Boy and that, I guess you could call it a franchise at this point. Looking back on it now, how do you feel about the whole experience? And I guess, would you like to go back there again, or do you see? Because it gets a lot of love online, and the character especially gets a lot of love, and I can't help but feel like, in a way, it has created. I don't like using the word horror icon, but it did really. I guess at the time when the movie came out, it was a little bit under the radar, and maybe more so over here in Europe. But over time, I think that image of the doll and that face has kind of pushed itself into the upper echelons of recognizable horror faces, I guess.
Yeah, just today, just about an hour ago, I don't know, I forgot who it was. Somebody sent me a link to an article that came out today that was the top 10 cute horror icons, and Brahms was number 9. But and Brahms, the character from In the Walls, is also got a whole thing going on, and it's crazy how much the kind of, like, I thought when we made the first film, we would do a sequel about the guy in the walls, and it would be a slasher. We created a new Michael Myers style character, and but in doing the movie, it was such a different movie from the doll part, that I was like, people are going to be like, they might enjoy the twist, but they're like, wait a minute, now what am I watching? It's a totally different movie here. So it's like, we'll get through it kind of quick, and but the way people have now responded to kind of the weird relationship between Lauren's character, Greta, and the guy in the walls, it's like, girls especially, they just really like this guy. And so I've noticed recently, it's like the doll and that character, they creep into some of the cartoons or drawings, or like they're sometimes in the same mix as Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger and stuff. So it's not like every time, but I just see it more and more. So I was like, oh, it's cool. It's like becoming part of that family.
Yeah. And
most of those characters have been around for 40 years. There aren't many new ones, that kind of stick around. So I've noticed that like, and then for me, definitely, some people hate the idea of sequels, and I get that in a way. I mean, I respect everybody's opinion, even if I don't agree with it, maybe. But to me, usually a movie, I'm just getting to know the characters, 90 minutes, 100 minutes. It's like, you're just getting into the rhythm of the characters.
Yeah. So
the idea of doing more movies, or it's like limited series, seems very natural to me. So it was like, the priority in doing the sequel to The Boy for the studio was they had 3 mandates. It started with just the doll. Nobody was thinking about the guy in the walls at all, and they were like, well, the doll's really stayed around, and it's been, he's being compared to Jared Kushner and all this stuff, and Jared Kushner always popped up, from politics, and so they're like, we need to make another movie. And then they said, but it has to be supernatural, and it has to revolve around a possessed boy. Like, there's not enough possessed boy movies. So those are kind of the mandates. But to me, I kind of didn't worry about it too much, because I look at it as, well, at least 3 movies, but it's just, there's too much story to tell to try to tell it in the second movie. So whether the second movie would focus on the doll or would focus on the guy in the walls, it's like, in a way, in my kind of head, I'm like, well, I'll get around to both stories eventually, hopefully. I don't know if we really will, but that's just the way I look at it. But for sure, it's tricky, but I would love I don't mean it's tricky story-wise, but almost logistically, I would definitely love to do a movie that focuses more on the real Brahms.
Yeah.
And just it's a world that can be built up, because you've got so many layers to it. And I think that would be super fun.
Yeah, I had so many people reach out, and a lot of the comments, I guess, were based around the same thing. A lot of people asked, you know, whose decision was it to focus more on the I guess demon supernatural side, and so many people bring up the end of the first movie, and I guess that anticipation of, I want to know more about what's going on with that whole thing.
You know what's crazy is you can't guess what people are really thinking. And so later, when the idea of like doing the sequel came up, we talked about doing a prequel. We talked about doing a lot of things. And of course, then it was like, well, let's take a step back. Like I said, you know, the doll is like in pop culture, like the doll is staying around. So we had to focus on the doll. And I don't think anybody quite realized how much the real Brahms was resonating with people. Yeah. But I think I forgot what I was going to say. Wait, hang on. It was great. I'm kidding. God.
If you had have had your way, would you have focused on? Would you have went a different way?
I would have done 2 movies.
Okay.
I would have, here's a couple things. So, like, I went all in with like what our idea was, and I wanted to take it much further. If you read all the early documents on the sequel, it was a lot more violent. Because I was like, let's take the gloves off. We had this first movie that kind of slowly introduced us to this world. Now let's really raise the stakes and not make it that, you know, the doll's pranking her and stuff. Because that's, you know, he didn't do. It's cool. It was great, and I feel lucky that we got to do a movie that was that much of an introduction to a character.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you really watch it, it's like he gave her food, he took her clothes, he locked her in the attic. He wasn't killing people, you know. So in the second movie, it's like, we have to start killing people, you know. We have to start raising the stakes, and at the end of the day, PG-13. You know, they didn't want to. I wanted to kill a little kid in the opening scene, and they're like, there's no way we're killing a kid in the opening. And even though It had just come out and a kid gets killed in the opening, and Quiet Place had come out, kid got killed in the opening, it's like, it's fine. It's not a big deal. And it just raises the stakes. Mm-hmm. And you saw the movie instead, it was like they got attacked, you know, but nobody died. But and then I love the idea of bringing Brahms back at the very end of the sequel. But I will say that the one thing that was getting us through all that was the idea that, well, the first movie everybody thought was going to be a supernatural movie, and it was like a haunted doll. Yeah. And then when the twist happened, it's like, well, you can't do a sequel and not kind of have another twist. So that was the idea. It was like, now everybody thinks it's going to be the guys in walls. So the story, the idea of the story was to trick you into thinking it's him. He's still alive, isn't he? And then to be like, no, it's not him. You know, the reason he's crazy is because this doll affected him and made him crazy. And it was always the doll, you know. It doesn't mean he doesn't exist and he's not real, but it's and you know, and then the whole idea, I guess you saw it. I don't know if you saw both cuts, but if you watch my version, it's considerably different. It wasn't until about the last 3 weeks before the movie came out, or 6 weeks, without my knowledge or the producers. They told us, but they didn't give us a choice, is that they went back with visual effects and made his eyes move and and they added that monster underneath the face, which did not exist in anything. That was not what it was supposed to be. Okay. And so I saw that for the first time when we saw the final sound mix, and it was like, why does he have a demon under him now with like a rotting eye and maggots? Like, what is this? You know, you've completely, and it also changed the story, because throughout the story now he was kind of moving, in which case the story was supposed to be that maybe these people were going crazy, but the audience was seeing the doll move and react, not the characters. So And that was totally a cheat. That was totally them going back and just finding spots where they could do visual effects, not caring how that played into the mythology. So it was really frustrating. It was terribly frustrating. And so, yeah, if you go to iTunes or whatever, you can also buy the alternate cut, which has none of that in it and has some other stuff, some other scenes. But at the end of the day, it still was kind of a supernatural thing. Mm-hmm. It just was a little more subtle.
Yeah.
And we struggled with how to end it. And looking back, I would have had, Brahms show up in the last 5 minutes and like take the doll with him and like save them or something, something crazy. I don't even know. We never even talked about it, but I like that idea. And now I'm like, excited in theory about the idea of doing a movie that includes the real Brahms more,
Yeah,
there's just a lot of story there.
Do you think we'll ever see that?
I think so. I mean, part of the problem with making the film too was the company that financed it and produced it, Lakeshore, went bankrupt after 60 movies, like halfway through post-production. So all of a sudden, the people who were like in charge, sort of, or who were my partners, were gone, and it was just the studio people who weren't the producers. And so their library, the movie, got sold to Village Roadshow, owns it now. So I don't know, with the way things are with streaming and everything, it's like, I think it's a lot easier to try to make another movie. I mean, I think it'd be great to be in theaters, and who knows, maybe it would be. But being that streaming's become just more the normal way that we look at a lot of stuff, it's like it's not as big of a gamble to try another movie. And I think it would be great. And then I think they could continue. I think it's a franchise. I think it should be. And I think it's hard to make a mark with a character. And I think the movie made a mark with two characters, really, which are kind of two sides to one character. And it's like, that's one of my favorite things about making horror films, is trying to make an iconic horror character. And I've tried to do it every time, sort of. And it's like, oh wait, this time it's kind of working, So hopefully we'll get to somehow expand on that.
That I definitely do agree, and it sounds funny to say, because I would love to see another movie in theaters, but it's strange because nowadays sometimes when a movie releases directly to a streaming platform, a lot of times it can feel nearly as big. I'm not sure what the culture is stateside, but I know over here it becomes, when there's a Netflix original, or even now with apps like Shudder, there's this buzz created now around the coming soon section, and everybody's like, oh, have you seen this new documentary that's coming out, or have you seen the trailer for this new movie? And it's created, and then things like TikTok. That was another place where I had seen the boy crop up so many times, and I think he has gone viral constantly on TikTok because people use clips of the movie, and they'll have whatever, like, craziest movie you might never have heard of, or things like that, and like these things get millions of views and so many comments of people being like, what's this movie? I need to know what this movie is. What's this character? Sometimes I think that can nearly be more beneficial nowadays.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy that people are going back to theaters. For a while it seemed like I didn't think it would go away, but I was like, I don't know. And now I'm like, no, of course it's not going away. And really, I'm just kind of like, as a society, what are we going to replace date night with? Pretty much. But it is like going to an amusement park. So by and large, those movies are like should be like roller coasters. And if it's not, it's a movie like The Boy, another one, or, that's a great thing. If like whoever, let's say Netflix, it's like what they would do, because, and they're smart about this. And like Blumhouse is pretty smart about this. If they see something that's working, they don't second guess. They just keep making sequels. Or in Netflix case, they make 10 episodes. So like if there's going to be a continuation of the story, I'd advocate, let's do a 6-hour continuation of the story. Let it be 6 episodes. And really that's the hard part about movies sometimes, is cramming everything into 90 minutes. And when I'm watching like a series like The Outsider, which I love, I'm like, what's so cool about it is they're spending 15 minutes every episode, adults seriously debating supernatural versus a real killer. And they're doing it in a way that, you get to kind of start to really think about it. And whereas in a movie, what's hard is you got to tell that stuff so fast sometimes that it feels forced. And it's this, it's one of the hard parts of movies. But that's why now it's all about, so much of it is about franchises. Because, okay, we've established the basic story and the basic characters. Now let's keep twisting and turning and creating new stories with it. So, it's like people always talk about IP, how important it is. And with something like The Boy, and like Stay Alive is the same way. I've, in the last year, every year, but in the last year or two, people just talking to me so much about Stay Alive. It's been crazy.
That was something I was going to bring up. I think, personally, that's a super underrated movie. And I don't know how many times over here I would be at different things or be in touch with other people who are as passionate. And I would mention that movie, be like, no, I don't think I've... And I'm like, how has this managed to... And it's funny, in recent years, there's a lot of movies like that I think have started to slowly creep back into, I guess, the spot that they probably should have been in the first place. And it's crazy because Stay Alive came out in 2006.
Yeah. It was 15-year anniversary or something.
Yeah,
it was
it's crazy because that's another one of those things where I thought there was potential for franchise, and I do think that the audience has evolved in recent years, in the sense that even if you look at the quality of content on something like YouTube that surrounds, let's just say, horror movies, for example, people want more long form. They want, if you've created something like The Boy, or I even think like things like Stay Alive, to the audience, there's not enough. I need now a 90-minute movie that I used to use as like a date night or whatever. Now I'm interested. Now you've got me on the hook. I want, like you said, I want 6 hours. I want 8 hours of expanded.
Especially the COVID thing in a way, but because we have a lot more time at home, even now. But if you watch something and you get to the end of it, like my girlfriend and I, it's just, oh, well, shit. Well, now what, So, and I'm watching so much more, especially with documentaries on Netflix. I'm like, this could have been a movie. Yeah. They stretched it out over 6 hours, but it's good. But I'm just like, they're really milking it.
Yeah.
But something like all these worlds, and I like creating worlds and stuff. Like Stay Alive is obviously a world that can go on and on and on, because you're dealing with kind of an alternate reality, video games. You could, now, of course, things like augmented reality and possibly, there's just a lot of ways to go. And when we were making that movie, I kind of was like, to me, a movie like The Last Starfighter, if you know that movie, which is a kid, who gets trained to be a Luke Skywalker, sort of, from a video game, and then some dude zaps him, puts him in space, and puts him in the same spaceship, and he can do it. And I was like, the movie kind of holds up in a way. It's not like an A-list film, but it's cool, and I had great memories as a kid seeing it. And I always kind of hoped that Stay Alive would be like that, that like kids would see it, and then now they're adults, now they're 30 if they were 15. And now they're going, yeah, that movie when I was a kid, I have really fond memories of it. And either they go back and watch it and go, yeah, I don't know if it holds up, but I feel like most people have a good reaction to it today. Yeah. And such a great cast and stuff. And the video game, we should, we wanted to make it 15 years ago. They wouldn't let us. It was a huge, I knew it was a huge mistake. And that's the thing about these franchises, like Blumhouse, like I said, is a great example, and New Line's is that. But if you're working with a company that doesn't quite understand horror, they're not going to be as quick to keep wanting to tell the story, They kind of do the one movie and go, let's see, I don't know, what is this? And then a movie every 3-4 years, it's like you said, we want to see stuff. So if we did another movie for The Boy or Stay Alive, and then people liked it, they'd be so pissed because they're like, so that's it? So now another 3 years and maybe you'll make another one? Yeah. So that's why I would, be like, just make 6 hours of material and really afford the ability to tell the story.
The another thing, because I had pulled out my my copy of Stay Alive that I had gotten years ago on DVD, and even with the DVD, I felt like it was way ahead of its time in a way. I know we used to have, you had quirky things that were done with menus, but in that, it was like, I guess maybe if you were to show it to someone now, they'd be like, nah, whatever. But for me, especially now, having seen that back then and then to revisit it, I was like, wow, this was like next level of immersion, and I feel like that's something that's super appreciated now by the audience that find these movies, that then you can go back and go, wow, this didn't just have a title card and play movie. They even put effort into the menus and kind of, I guess, a little game, essentially.
Yeah, and there's an Easter egg in there too, right? Like if you pick the right sword with the right character with the right shirt, it does a separate. Yeah. It's a separate menu, right? Yeah. Then you can, I mean, it was all like the ideas were great, and everything just was barely touched on, because they didn't. And like the head of the studio, who I've worked with on a couple movies. Years later, a decade later, he was like, it was ahead of its time, not like in a hoity-toity kind of way, but people really meaning executives, they didn't really understand the value of what video games were going to be and what they were, and then, because they made us cut out so much video game from that movie because they're like, nobody's going to want to watch people playing a video game. But it's like, well, that's not really what it is. It's part of the story. And it turned out to be very well liked part of the story. And so it was a shame, that they did that. And they cut it out before it was ever even close to being finished. So they were like cutting it out before they had to spend money, basically. But now, even making a game, is all, everything about it. I mean, we're totally trying to figure it out. It's complicated because it's Disney, and Disney doesn't, But here's what's crazy is, we've been talking about it for a few months, like very seriously, and trying to really nail down how the rights are controlled, because that gets very complicated sometimes. Like I said, with The Boy, somebody else owns the rights now. And then I got a call from Disney last week, and I had to go in and do a new cut of Stay Alive because it's being released. Like Disney's releasing it on their AVOD platforms. They didn't tell me what, but I was like, is this a coincidence that like out of the blue now, like they're doing a kind of a TV version that can be released probably on Hulu and stuff, which it hasn't been on. And the week before I had to do a different cut of The Boy so it could be on free TV, which has never been on that before. It's only been on pay TV, which is interesting. So, I think that the reason and like with Disney Plus, in a way, Disney Plus is the perfect place for it if they want to go there, because it's not a hardcore horror film franchise, but I think it's kind of Disney friendly within reason, as much as Mandalorian is violent, and but I don't know. I mean, we'll know if they put it on there or where they're going to put it, but.
So was there
it'd be fun.
consideration, I guess when that, in the aftermath of that movie, was a sequel ever considered?
The thing is, when we made the movie, we made it independently. It was supposed to be tiny, and then it just got bigger and bigger. And then when we finished, we showed we cut a trailer together, and Disney, was like, we're going to buy the movie, and we're going to relaunch Hollywood Pictures, which had been dormant for like a decade. Mm-hmm. And the last movie they did was Sixth Sense. And they're like, we haven't done a movie Sixth Sense since. We're going to bring back this label. I said, well, that sounds cool, sort of. It was a mistake, really. Sort of a mistake. And then they did it, and they were like, this isn't what we're supposed to be doing. I mean, and they've certainly found their branding now, mm-hmm. which is everything. But so no, at the time it was, I think they did the one movie and kind of like, we don't really understand horror. Let's just, and it was a small movie, let's go back, let's do Pirates of the Caribbean. And so if it was, once again, like if it was with a Blumhouse or like a New Line, or Blumhouse wasn't around then, but they know the importance of a franchise.
Yeah, because that could have had potential to be a huge IP, I think.
Yeah, and I do still think that like the whole idea of it being ahead of its time, or whatever you want to say, is like it wasn't a no-brainer to make another movie at that moment for all the people involved. They're just going, yeah, was this worth all the trouble? And the thing about these movies, like when critics go see it, and who are these critics? At the time, middle-aged people who go and critique an art film and versus a horror film, like it's pointless. And then over time, when the real audience finds the movie, that's for me really the telling sign of like, did it resonate? Did it work? And these movies, most of the movies I do, it's like they age well, sort of. Mm-hmm. Like over time, people enjoy them for what they are instead of them competing with the biggest movies in the world, sort of, and then a critic judging them against the biggest movies in the world. Because it's really, I mean, I wouldn't expect any critic to like almost any horror film. Sometimes they do. That's cool. Usually they don't, no matter how much we do, how much, they don't like any Halloween movies, right? But we love those movies, and Jason Voorhees and a million things. So it's it's fun creating these franchises, sort of. And I think now with the way things are, there's a real opportunity to be able to actually expand on these movies, because it doesn't matter how inexpensively, like Devil Inside, doesn't matter if we made it for $750,000. It costs $30 million to market, so it's $30,750,000 movie now. So it's so expensive to market a movie successfully in theaters, and if you don't spend that money, well, then the movie's not going to find an audience. Yeah. So, but to be able to utilize streaming the way it is really exciting for those movies. The Boy did fine in theaters. But it wasn't until it got released on Netflix 2 years later that like I could just feel like, kind of fans. And I was like, what's going on? And I was like, oh, it got released on Netflix. I mean, more people see something on Netflix than they would ever see in movies. Yeah. In theaters, I mean. So especially movies this specific and kind of smaller. Anyway, you're going to ask me something.
No, I was kind of on the same point, I guess. I mean, I even remember that was another one of those things I alluded to earlier when The Boy popped onto the coming soon section, at least on the Irish or UK Netflix. That was another one of those things that everybody was like, oh my God, The Boy, have you seen this? It's like the new this and it's the new that, and it's better than Annabelle and it's better than Chucky, and it's not comedic or whatever.
Yeah.
And there was such a buzz around it, and I guess sometimes when I think about it, it's upsetting, that you hear these stories of some of these movies come out and they just don't really ever get the time, or like you said, maybe sometimes higher ups or people just don't really get it.
Oh yeah.
And that's one thing I do like about, I guess, social media in a way, and the power of the internet and streaming and different things, that now, like, so many times now I go online and I see, especially within like the horror community, I will see people talk about Stay Alive, for example, and like there's all these blockbuster movies that are releasing, and you know, you go on Reddit and there's a thread with 600 comments of people being like, "Oh my god, I just discovered this movie, best movie ever! Can't believe I've never heard of it." Something like that. It's great that that's there now. That these things can live on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that, like, because of technology, being that we can watch movies on our phones and computers and kind of anywhere, and it's not predicated on like that $30 million marketing budget, like I said, because there's big enough groups of people who can like create their own bubble and like something, and it's enough to make that the idea of making more of those movies make sense. So it's fascinating. It's just part of the world becoming smaller, you know. It's cool.
You had you made what I would consider, and I'm a huge fan of I guess werewolves and creature feature kind of movies, and you had made what I would class now as one of the best. And again, it's another one of those movies where I've mentioned it at times and people are like, "No, I'm not sure," or maybe I did see it, and I'm like, again, this is now, I will say this is the one I'm completely blown away by, that I cannot understand how that movie has kind of, I wouldn't say, you know, nobody's seen it or it hasn't got the light of day, but it, for me, where it seemed its trajectory went versus where I think it should have went.
Yeah, it was a huge screw up.
Yeah. So tell me about the story then, I guess, of that, because that movie is, and this is not just because we're talking, that I thought that movie was incredible and such an interesting.
Thanks.
I mean, we've seen so many zombie movies, and a lot of times it's just a cookie cutter. It's kind of the same movies over and over again, or you know, you'll see a 28 Days Later, and people will try and replicate that kind of style. Or we have, this was a completely different take on it, and for somebody who consumes so many movies, and I don't necessarily not like, you know, I like slasher films and they all kind of follow the same formula and it's cool and it's fun and whatever, but I love when you go into a movie and you're just completely thrown on your head, and for me this movie done that, and I can't understand how I guess, how did you how did this project first come to be, and then I guess a little bit of maybe the story of what happened with it.
Yeah, you know, of course we made Devil Inside, which we made totally independent, and we didn't, that was before Paranormal Activity, and so by the time we were releasing Devil Inside, it took us, 7 years all in. When Stay Alive came out, that day we were pitching Devil Inside. Wow. We were going around town pitching it. So that was March 2006, and it wasn't released till January 2012. But and then we finally made that movie. And then we, you know, Paramount, all that stuff, because of paranormal, you know, people were taking chances on wide releases for these tiny movies, sort of, they were released. So right when that came out, or right as that was being finished, we decided we wanted to do, you know, a similar style but different werewolf movie, you know, where all the crazy stories we see in movies about werewolves are stories, but they're all based on something real. And what's real was this, you know, it was a real condition. It was some guy howling at the moon who looked like he was covered in hair, who was crazy, and he killed, you know, some kids, or he killed some animals. And then that story turned into most of the movies we see today. A guy turns into a dog, and which is, I love some of those movies. Mm-hmm. But I was like, but what if we do a movie where it's like, no, he doesn't. This is what all those stories were based on, is a person like him. And and it was that same producer I mentioned for Stay Alive, or not producer, but studio guy. And so they, let us go make that film. And since we didn't kind of finance it ourselves, we lost a bit of control over what happened to it after the fact. Yeah. And so people were kind of jumping on this band, but when they have that movie finished, they're going, it doesn't have any movie stars. It's handheld and kind of raw. They're like, they got kind of scared. And then Film District was the studio. Film District went bankrupt. That's what happens sometimes. That's what happened with, Brahms, sort of. Mm-hmm. So when they went and they couldn't tell us they were going bankrupt, until like an hour before it was announced. The president called. He goes, okay, you're going to see in the trades, So that was our distributor. That was our everything. And they couldn't. And so then I realized, I get it now. Why nobody will return our phone calls about that cut and stuff, because it didn't make any sense to a lot of us. Like the trailer, because we had cut together a fake. They gave us one day to go shoot $15,000 to go shoot a trailer, which is very much like the trailer in the real movie. Mm-hmm. And we shot that, and then the trailer played great, the real one. Devil Inside had done great. And the movie tested great, but they were like, no, we're not going to release it no matter what. And then they wouldn't let me put it into festivals, like Fantastic Fest in Montreal called, and they were like, we want to put it in the festival. We didn't submit it. They called me, and they said, but the studio said no. And I was like, what? Let me talk to them. And so I had a meeting with them, and they were like, yeah, we can put it in the festival. And then that guy called me back a couple of days later, the head of that festival. And he's like, never in my 14 years has a studio turned us down twice. And they were going to open it up. It was going to be the premiere movie opening up. The other premiere movie was going to be Guardians of the Galaxy. So Where and Guardians of the Galaxy would be the two movies. And we didn't think Guardians of the Galaxy, we knew it was a huge movie. But I know when I first saw trailers, I was like, well, that looks interesting. I didn't think it was going to be as good and such a phenomenon. But it was, really good. So, Where's a small movie that should have been a big, a hit, for what it was. And so I've never got to show the movie anywhere. And we never, in our release, got pulled from us because the studio disappeared. And so Blum tried to take the movie over at one point. And because we didn't know until it was too late, they were at Toronto, and he was like, yeah, we want to come on board. Then we would have released it through Universal. And then he called me back the next day or something. He was like, we made a deal for this movie called Oculus, so we can't buy two movies. So instead they got Oculus, which, was cool. And of course, he's made a lot of cool things in the horror space. Mm-hmm. And Where just basically just was one of those movies that never got released, essentially. I mean, it got released, but nobody knew. And it didn't even, so what I hope to do is some cool festival, Citrus, or I don't know, is to take that, and screen that movie for an audience, mm-hmm. because it's a fun movie to watch in a theater. And the only time I got a chance to watch it was when we tested it a couple times. So yeah, it was just a heartbreaking process that was created by a lot of lesser friends and family, creating this movie. And we kind of killed ourselves to do it. And then it just was it was just bad, bad timing. So
without getting,
and, I will say this. One funny thing was I remember the studio, at first they did a movie called Parker. Wait, it was Jason Statham and J-Lo, like an action movie. Mm-hmm. That I never saw it. It didn't do very well, and studio, they were like, well, Brent, we can put Jason, we put Jason Statham on Parker. We can't put anybody on your poster. And I'm like, well, first of all, Parker tanked, so it didn't help. And I was like, but all you need is an arresting image. You need, I go, look at Devil Inside. It was just a nun or the mother. Just having an image of this guy. Anyway, but once again, when you're dealing with companies that kind of are dipping their toe into the horror space, they're also really quick to kind of turn and walk the other way and go, you know what? Because with that movie, we made it for nothing. They made a ton of money on it, because they were able to dump that movie. And you're not dumping a $30 million movie, you're dumping a $3 million movie. So it's going to make double its money easily, right? So no risk. Or are they going to spend $25 million to market it? And they just kind of were like, it was too scary for them or for anybody else. And they wouldn't, and it was crazy.
I guess without seeming too negative or whatever, how do you talk about these different experiences where I feel like several times maybe it's just been, I guess, unfortunate events or maybe bad luck or maybe a little bit hard done by in a sense. And over time, I think you've managed to, time and time again, build these worlds and build what I would consider potential huge IPs. And especially, for somebody like Jason Blum or whatever, I would imagine that something like that's on his radar, being like, okay, this is what we tried to do. And somebody like you has managed to do it time and time again. But I guess when things weren't going great, or when you had put all, your blood, sweat and tears into a movie like that and it doesn't pan out the way you wanted to, how did you deal with, I guess, I don't want to call it the depression, but I guess that feeling and trying to pick yourself back up again and follow the dream, I guess, again?
Yeah, I mean, for one, I always kind of remind myself like how fortunate I am to make movies, because that's what I love to do. And so it's like, I'm really grateful to do it. Mm-hmm. So when I get too down on those situations, I'm just like, well, you're making movies. But the biggest thing is, every time it's just kind of trying to go out and not prove people wrong. To just, I see why these things sometimes don't work. And sometimes part of it's my fault too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I learn every movie and every script and whatever I'm doing, but I'm just still like completely as hungry to make a great film. And especially, I guess, when almost every time they don't ever go from A to Z and don't turn out the way I want them to be, like, because we screwed some things up. But sometimes it's, like we should have made a video game for Stay Alive, or where it should have been released. Somebody should have taken a chance. It would have done great. We should have been making sequels to The Boy really quickly. There's just a lot of those things that I'm just kind of excited to try it again, Yeah. And it's like, so just doing Esther now, I feel really good about Esther, and we're almost done. And it's like, I love the original and I was a big fan of it. And that's why I even read the script, and it was like, how are you going to do the movie without Isabel? And so then figured out how to do it with Isabel, and which for me, that's part of it too, is these, a challenge of like, we almost cast a little girl in Esther, which, you would have had to practically, unless you do it with Isabel, right? And but I love the challenge of trying to make the Isabel thing work. And don't get me wrong, it works great. But even if I would rather fail trying something like a video game in Stay Alive and trying to kind of go, no, this is a different thing we can do. Same thing with Where, the studio, years later when we met. And there's some bad blood sort of between us, because like you guys kind of gave up on the movie, and I don't think you should have. but I remember he was like, I won't say who it was, and he's a friend, I like him, but he's like, well, we just learned that the world didn't want a werewolf movie where the guy doesn't turn into a werewolf. And I was like, I disagree. I think they liked the movie. I think we should have released it. So I get a kick out of trying to do something different, you know, and I would be bored if I wouldn't have been bored with doing Esther with a little girl, but I wouldn't have been as excited, you know, like the challenge of having her running around 5.5 feet tall and everybody having to buy into this idea that in the movie she's gonna, you know, be a child, and it was so difficult, you know, forget the fact we were shooting it during COVID, but shooting with 4 doubles and forced perspective and, you know, trying to do a lot of old school filmmaking tricks to utilize this idea. And it's all turned out great. And the stories turned out great. And the script was great to begin with. And the cast turned out great. I mean, there was a time when the cast could have been very different. And I would have been really not as excited as I am right now. Mm-hmm. But the whole family, the main core family of that movie, they're all so good. And the movie's so fun. And, you know, knock on wood, it's like, you know, I never know. But a big reason that I pushed really hard at the very beginning for Isabel to do it, other than the fact that, you know, we went and had dinner and she was like, I really want to do it. And I was like, really? Like, you want to put your whole like legacy of this character you created kind of on the line and you could blow up in your face. And she totally is just, and she's just a real courageous girl. But then the fan reaction, it was right after we announced that we were doing the movie, I got death threats. I mean, like, people were so like, you can't do this movie without Isabel Fuhrman. She is the character, you know? Mm-hmm. And I was just like, these people are really, you know, I don't even think the studio quite knew, you know, like how passionate people are about her character, about Lena, and how important it is to, like, you know, you have to make a great movie, but and you can't make a movie and guess just what fans want or something. Yeah. But you have to be respectful, you know, to what they loved about the first movie. And you know, when you have such a great first film, you know, it's kind of like having the answers to the test a little bit. Like, there's things we're pushing, you know, doing, because, you know, you don't want to do the same movie twice, of course. But having that first film and it be so solid, it's like, that was always the fallback, you know, to point to and go, well, wait a minute, we're trying to do one thing here, but the first film was really successful in this kind of, I'm talking in riddles here, so I don't want to give anything away.
I know, yeah.
But, believe me, I mean, a lot of people, I mean, I had somebody who just sent me a text and they said something like, you know, alluding to, like, this sounds silly, or not silly, but specific, a big failing, you know, and so asking what you said, but this being kind of a friend who's kind of a jerk. And but I don't really quite think of it that way, because I'm just excited I'm trying to come back to answer that question again, but I'm just excited to, like, keep improving and keep, you know, trying these ideas. And especially, you know, it's now when you see things like Stay Alive and I know the reaction to where, you know, so, like, I don't think I'm delusional. Like, no, I'm like, people like this or this or this. Yeah. And it's just very difficult, you know, and even with, like, Separation, it's so difficult to get, like, movies in theaters and to get a company to get behind something or, so, like I said, I feel really fortunate just when those things even work out. Yeah. And I think if you try to, if I get to make some movies where every single thing worked out exactly how I hoped, then it'll turn out like Where, you know, it's probably, like, I think my favorite movie and it certainly, wrote it, produced it, directed it, edited it, like everything, visual effects, myself, a lot of it. And yet it's the one that nobody knows,
Yeah, it's crazy.
And the most famous one is like Devil Inside, which also the most people hate, but also people like it. But it's like, it's this, if you're going to put something out there in the world, like on a really big scale, you just have to prepare to be destroyed, and otherwise it's like a movie like Where, it's like, oh great, but did you see that? But nobody's seen it, so it's tricky.
I get what you mean there, and that's one thing I love about your work is I think you're rightfully so, you're unapologetically you, and you have your vision and your style, and I don't know what your stance is on somebody like, say, Rob Zombie, but it reminds me of that. A lot of people give him shit for his versions of Halloween and different things like that.
Sure.
And they may be warranted. The thing I can respect about him is you got Rob Zombie's Halloween. And I feel like that with your work, when you look back at some of the movies, you've definitely built the foundations multiple times for these potential, like, what I would consider huge IP franchises. And I know that I'm not the only person who's super excited now to see what's going to happen with this sequel. I think everyone is super excited. Do you have, or I guess when you're when you come up with an idea or you want to get involved in a project, do you actively, I guess, try and get involved with somebody? Like I can't help but keep thinking something like Blumhouse would really get behind your work and how you envision, I guess, how you would like things to be. I know they're very, I don't want to say hands off, but a lot of times I hear Jason talk about different things, and a lot of times he says that he likes to let the filmmaker make the films, and I'll just step back and.
Well, he was the only, him and Steven Schneider were the only producers we showed The Devil Inside to, like as a rough cut. And it was some weird, funny politics, and Steven ended up becoming a producer on it. And at that time, him and Jason had a falling out, and now they're cool. But at that time, it was all a big deal. And so Jason and I sold a series that I created which was my, like, kind of my take, like my zombie thing, if you will. And it was this big series. USA bought it, wrote the pilot. Everything was going great. And then, like so many projects, then it just doesn't move forward. So we went to that, so Jason and I went all around town pitching the show, and we sold it. So we had, and I still have a good relationship with those guys. And whenever I have a break between movies, I usually kind of reach out, like we reconnect, because especially in the last couple of years, I'm just like, it's so important to me, if I can, to work with people who understand horror, not just, like Lakeshore's great, and they did Underworld, which is cool, but it's not quite horror, but it is, but they just make a lot of great movies. And so with Blumhouse, for instance, like, they understand scary movies, and they do kind of let the filmmakers make their film. And if you don't want to take their advice, you can say no, and then maybe the film won't get released. But it's just never, with them anyway, it's just never worked out timing wise. And so I still think about that, and it's just finding the right, like the project that I'm supposed to go do in London. They read it like a year ago, and it's a bit more of an A24 like flavor horror film, and they were like, it's great, but it's just not exactly as commercial as a film we would normally do, which made sense because they know their brand sort of, even though they shift it sometimes. They know they're not making stuff to win awards, even though they're sometimes awesome. They're making movies that they feel are going to work the way they think they're going to work. And that movie is, I mean, I hope it can be universal and find an audience after we're done with it. But it's definitely an artsier film. But so now though I'm going to do that, so it's like I can't work with someone like Jason because I'm going to be busy. But yeah, I mean, there's a handful of those people that I'd love to make films with, and you know, doing Esther has been great because it's like Dark Castle, who, you know, they made a lot of really cool horror films in the early 2000s, late 90s.
Honestly,
right?
they're probably, and I know I'm not the only one, they are probably one of my favorite companies. I have so many fond memories of, you know, 13 Ghosts, Ghost Ship, all those different movies. I and that's, you know, things like Stay Alive and all I get that same feeling. When I look at those movies, I guess you could call it a comfort horror. It brings me back to a place, and I feel it makes me feel good. But then it also, I want to see those things revived. I want to go back there again. And you know, when I seen Dark Castle, we're going to do this, and it kind of made me excited for. Can we potentially see other things come out of this? And
yeah, I mean, they're focused on, they know kind of what they want to do. And Orphan is, compared to say 13 Ghosts and a lot of those, Orphan's a little more, it's not quite as comedic, right?
Yes, of course.
If you will.
Yeah.
It's less and most of their stuff, but it's still very fun and mischievous and devious. And certainly the sequel is even more kind of fun. But they know, you know, Alex Mace is the president over there. They know what their brand is, and their brand is horror, but it's like that has fun. So I haven't seen Seance yet, but I know, you know, it fits that paradigm pretty much. I think it's pretty fun. In that case, it's a throwback. So I can see why they made that, but they're just getting going again because they had been shut down for a decade or more. So it's been great working with them because, you know, they're going to keep making horror films after the one I'm making with them. So it's like they're looking at the big picture, and they are looking at the movie as experts, if you will, like in horror, you know. So it's cool that they're back, and they're going to just keep making a lot of stuff. And I think that it's going to be good for horror. You know, Blum is still going to keep doing what he's doing. And, you know, Atomic Monster and New Line are just, and, you know, and like David Leslie Johnson, you know, the original writer of Orphan, who wrote the Conjuring movies now. And he was very much involved, you know, in the Orphan sequel. So it was nice being with, you know, horror-centric producers and creators on this one. You know, everything was kind of clicking in the right way. Now it's just finding more of those people, or getting or finding projects to have with them, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so I've I guess a couple of quick fire questions before I let you go. If you could only watch one movie for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I mean, I guess it doesn't matter how long it is. After a couple times, you'd be bored with it anyway, sort of. My favorite movie is The Professional. You know, for years and years, I had people say, "What's your favorite movie?" Even as a kid, and you're like, "Well, I got like at least 10, right?" Star Wars, and you know, it's just, it depends what you mean. But I realized about, I don't know when it was, 10, 15 years ago, I was like, "Oh yeah, The Professional is my favorite movie." Like that's like just for some reason, it actually stands out to me as my favorite movie. I just love it. So yeah, I would probably say that.
That's I love hearing those answers, because it's it's normally not what you would think it would be. Because I think a lot of people maybe might expect, yourself to say, oh, if the original Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street or something like that. And a lot of times, again, it's another one of those things that for a lot of people listening, it's a curveball, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's all about like the fun of the movie and then the characters and the filmmaking, and you fall. I mean, he's like Frankenstein. I mean, he's like a monster sort of. He hardly says anything, and this little girl, and it's like I just love that paradigm, that dynamic. I just love those characters and everything that happens, and so yeah, I don't know.
Is there a project or an IP or a franchise that you would love to, other than obviously some of the stuff you've done, is there anything else out there that you would love to work on or give your take on?
You mean like existing huge things? Kind of
a character or a story, I guess, that you...
No, I mean, I'm standing trying to think. It's like for instance, it's, Where was that way? A lot of these things are. I mean, for me, a lot of times it's taken a really big concept and then kind of boiling it down to something that's like, oh, wait a minute, like that's kind of believable, or that could have happened. I would have answered this question easier before, like several years ago. Like I went in and met with Legendary Pictures, who used to be, co-financed everything at Warner Brothers, and they did all of Chris Nolan's movies. And we had just done Where, and I had a really strong connection with the guy who ran that place then. He since has left, but so went in, showed him the trailer to Where, and I was like, look, if I did like Superman, but I don't want to do it like Kansas, and it's like I would want to be. It's like it's some kid living in the Bronx, or like a real gritty, like not your typical Superman. And I look back and I'm laughing, going like he was like, right. And of course they went off and then they made those Superman movies, which are straightforward Superman movies. But then you see Joker, and it's like that's what I'm talking about. So to me, my kind of what I've tried to convince people when I try to make movies like Where. So I look at something like Joker, and it played a little bit into even Esther, but I'm like that, if you would have asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have described Joker to you, not with that character, but a grounded, realistic way where you can look at that mythology and go, oh, I see where the makeup came from. Yeah. And it was organic to the story. Oh, he laughs, which I've never seen anybody do, but it's a medical condition. Everything's really gritty. He doesn't have a master plan. He's not a supervillain who is going to take over the world. In fact, at the end of the movie, he was just going to kill himself and decided like, I'm just going to shoot this guy. And at the end of the day, other than a couple things, that's all he did. And his character is really rich, and shades of gray. He's not good or bad. You're like, well, I see he's mentally touched, and his mother was nuts, and she treated him in a certain way, and society is a certain way. So had I known that existed, I would have said that. And that to me is what's fun. I don't know what that is anymore right now, because I just haven't had a chance to think about but in a way that cat's out of the bag, sort of like people, I'm amazed that Warner Brothers was able to, or that Todd, that they were able to get that movie through the whole studio system and it be a great film and a hugely successful film. It's usually going to be one or the other. And it would have been, that's the art house Joker. And it kind of flopped, but it's like, no, and I, personally, I've been like trying to, convince people of that take on big concepts for a long time. So I don't know what that IP is, but I know that's what excites me. But like I said, it's not as groundbreaking, if you will, or it's not like I'm ahead of the curve on that anymore, like taking a really cartoonish, over the top character and boiling it down to something real is, but I don't know.
Yeah, that you're right there, and the character of the Joker. I was actually really surprised when I left the movie that night, and it kind of stuck with me for a long time. I thought about how did they actually manage to make this movie, because I would imagine if I were to put myself in an exec's chair or whatever, I'd be thinking, you are crazy. We're not making this movie. We want to make, Joker, haha.
And it's not even just the bigger concept, small things like, and even in doing Esther, this would come up in kind of disagreements or arguments about what's happening in the movie. It's like, if I was making A Quiet Place, I think that's an awesome, franchise, and it's such a great device. And 99% of the time, they'd have been like, Brent, this is great. We love it. Let's make it. By the way, only note, they have to talk. Like, the people have to be able to talk. And it's like, well, that's the whole concept. And with Joker, it's like him dancing, That would have, I don't know how that didn't get cut out of the movie, just because they would be like, Joker can't just dance around. That's stupid. It's boring. It's silly. It's like, no, it's amazing. And so it's a feat that those things seem to just, like, that movie seemed to slip through those typical filters, and it paid off.
Maybe it'll soften up people for to be open to things like that again. Have you ever had any paranormal experiences, whether it be on set or just in general?
I don't think so necessarily. I had a really active imagination when I was a little kid. I still do, probably, I guess. And so I wouldn't say there. I mean, I thought a witch every night when I was asleep. I would hide under the covers, when I couldn't get to sleep, and I would thought, and the window was open, like in the summer or whatever, and I thought a witch would climb into my room and go around my room like it was a store, like your room there, and she could pick things out. And I thought if she saw me, that she would pick me and then take me away. So that's not a supernatural thing. It's but a superstition. That I believe that stuff, but not really. It's like, that's part of the fun of making these kinds of films, is a lot of times that one piece of the puzzle for like a supernatural story is the thing that really there's no definitive proof about, that in the film we get to kind of assume that proof is real. Yet I'm still kind of looking for, I'm waiting for like a priest to come out of an exorcism with 15 GoPro cameras and go, look what I saw. Because I'm like, is the devil really not letting you do that? Like, not letting, and if the devil doesn't do anything bad, if you have cameras around, well, let's just put cameras everywhere. But it's like, someday somebody's going to capture something or not. And so I'm excited for that to happen. But no, nothing's really ever happened to me.
When you look to come up with an idea, or maybe it's just a natural thing, but where do you think your inspirations come from, or what do you, when you're trying to create a world, or whether it be a character or whatever it is there certain things that you pull inspiration from, or is it just everyday things in life that you'll kind of clock in your mind?
Well, it's probably a couple of, like, one is when people always would say, like, to writers, like, write what you know. And there's a lot of truth to that. But I think a mistake a lot of writers would make is then they write a movie about a young screenwriter moving to Hollywood. It's like, no, it's like, pull from your personal experience, but then put it into like an imaginative world. So I really like to, to create characters that, like, I relate to or fall in love with, so that if something bad happens to them, that, we care. And otherwise it's usually just trying to do things that haven't quite been done before, or that feel different to me, and if something excites me, like Esther excites me because the script was cool and it lived up to the first one. And I already told them before I read it that I was like, it's not gonna, you need that twist. And the script kind of delivers in that way. And I was like, wow, okay. I was really impressed. But equally as fun is the challenge of going, how are we going to pull off this kind of magic trick, with Isabel? And so that's what gets me excited to come up with ideas for everything that's happening in a story is just things that excite me, and feel fresh, or different. I mean, some things aren't. Some tropes are tropes, in a way, but it's kind of like finding ways to, like there was a point when we were doing Where or something, somebody met with us and wanted us to do a Bigfoot movie. I say us, I mean me and Matt Peterman, and that's, Bigfoot's always been kind of a joke, right? And probably he was like, why would we want to do Bigfoot? I go, well, that's the challenge. Like, let's do the cool Bigfoot movie, like the Bigfoot movie that like nobody's ever done. That I'm sure that I know that, people have done a lot of them sort of, but like, it's one of those, and no, it's not a dream like project of mine to do Bigfoot, but I definitely was like, yeah, that's a challenge. And so anytime an idea feels like that, like with Devil Inside, it's like doing it not in a studio way, because nothing had been really done like that except for Blair Witch and Cloverfield, which was a huge movie. And I was like, I'm not really interested in trying to do it like with a handy cam. But then I thought about it and I was like, well, wait a minute. If these guys are doing experiments and they have cameras that they can mount places, well, those are cutting points we can use and have different angles and close-ups. And I was like, well, that's exciting because that's different. And we can build on that. So it's usually kind of that. Yeah. That coupled with what is the kind of emotional core of the story to where I care about the characters,
If you could give a piece of advice to somebody looking to, I guess, follow a path of, I guess, someone like a dreamer. So whether it be somebody who wants to get into writing, directing, or something along those lines, is there a piece of advice that you would give someone trying to follow a passion like that?
Well, definitely to do it is the first thing, It's like anybody can do it. And, people are going to like all sorts of different stories in the world. So if it's something you're passionate about, or storytelling, something you're passionate about, then do it. And especially now when technology's so accessible and, where you can edit a movie on your laptop and shoot it on your phone, and not just like, oh, it's some crappy movie, but now an iPhone, like, you know what I mean? Like it's you can really, and then try to just not get discouraged, by it. Create, movies you're passionate about. I know, like the first movie that Matt and I sold as a script, we were frustrated because we were trying to because I had made a tiny little student film, basically, which was kind of an indie film. And I was frustrated going, wow, it's going to take forever for me to ever make the kind of movie I want to make if I keep creating these tiny little indie films. And I don't mean Stay Devil on the Side or something. I mean like a regular movie. And then Matt and I, it was the first thing we ever wrote together. We're like, just, screw it. What's the movie we want to see in theaters? Like, what's our dream movie? And so we wrote that. And then it just happened. It came out so fast because we loved it so much, and that carried through. That the fact that we loved these characters and we loved this big high concept of this movie, then the biggest producers in town all fought over this script and bought it. It never got made. But I look back at other people, who are going, oh, so I need to write like a techno thriller then, and then they try to copy what we like friends that copy that. It's like, no, you need to write what excites you, because that's what comes through. So it's not write what you know and go write about yourself. It's like write what you get excited about. And because people will feel that excitement on the other end, and that's what then will, so instead of trying to figure out what people will like, it's like just, believe in like what you like. And yeah, don't get discouraged by it. Just keep plugging along.
Why horror, and what does it mean to you?
Stephen King has that quote, which I really love, which is, we create the horrors. We create we create horror to help us deal with the real ones. So I love that aspect, where a horror film can deal with, real people and their problems and characters. It doesn't always have to. I mean, sometimes it doesn't, but to me that's exciting. And then it's an opportunity to kind of experiment and do, in a way. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, but it's a world with filmmaking where that same reason that sometimes a studio doesn't give the movie enough attention at times, because they don't understand the genre, also sometimes gives you a certain amount of freedom to do things, because they're like, we don't understand what you're doing. We try, like, they don't watch those kinds of movies sometimes. So it allows you to kind of like run with an idea. And I got to tell you, the other thing is like, and I know I still will, but every time after a film, I would really like start looking at bigger movies or science fiction movie or something different. And those movies are much more difficult to get off the ground, and because they just require a lot more. The politics is so much sillier. And then around the time like a movie would come out, the community and the fan base of horror films, I'm like, man, if I did another movie, if I did a comedy, or if I did a drama, or if I did even a science fiction film, it's like there wouldn't be all this kind of excitement and this fan base that's built in that is just, you just don't get to experience that if you're making other types of movies. And even creating them, like one of my favorite parts of the process is when we test the movie, to actually be in a room with 300 people and feel them kind of ebb and flow to, did they laugh in the right spots, or did they laugh in unexpected spots? And are they quiet where you can't hear anything? And do they laugh and scream and jump? It's just, there's just so many things about it that I feel like I would, be a little disappointed getting too far away from it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So what can we expect from you then, I guess, let's say in the next 12 months? And where can people find you, support you, and follow you?
I guess my handles are just Instagram and Twitter and stuff. William Brent Bell, or WM Brent Bell. But a few things, it's like, so here, I'll show you. Like this huge book, it's Floating Dragon. Sony bought that for me. So we're turning that into getting to the point of turning it into a series.
Oh, wow.
It's Peter Straub, if you know him as a novelist, he did Ghost Story, and he's done he's written a couple books like The Talisman with Stephen King. But that's a big thing that I'm excited about. And of course, Esther, and which we're just finishing, and hopefully going to film Lord of Misrule is the movie that going to London to shoot, if it's possible, but we're supposed to. And then, I just have some other projects that I have to get closer.
Yeah, before you can
to development. Stay Alive, we're really excited about. We have this We, meaning me and Matt, because we did that one together. And then.
So Stay Alive is a real possibility of something happening with that again?
Yeah, for sure. It'll come down to rights, but or permission, and we're still in that like discovery phase to try to figure that out. But I mean that's like, for me, that's a really exciting thing. It's like Lord of Misrule is a very like a drama, like an indie horror film, a little more not straightforward, but it doesn't have some crazy trick, meaning it's, but then Stay Alive to me, it's like the opposite end of the spectrum, because we always wanted to take the gloves off with that movie, because it can do so much. And for me, that would be really fun. And then a bunch of animated stuff, I'm working on, and like the Grizzly Kin, if you can see them. Yeah. It's like, that's a whole fun world, and we're developing all that stuff into a kind of a big universe.
How do you juggle all these projects and all this work and everything? Is that a difficult task to?
Well, it depends. I mean, when I go to make something, then yes, it's like I have to kind of check out a little bit from the other stuff. But like my mother used to always ask me that. Like a producer friend of mine was like, "Hey, can we talk about like other projects you have?" And I was like, "Look, I'll give you my like grid," and it's like 150 projects, And he's like, 150. What am I going to do? But it's the same thing if you keeping track of, I could talk to you about 100 movies, and you could talk about them in and out, no problem, right? It's the same thing. It's just I'm creating those movies, but it's really no different, And once again, it's like not giving up. If the project's good, even if like Devil Inside, kept coming and going in development, and the financing kept falling apart in different ways, and people would get frustrated. And I was like, well, it's frustrating, but people like the project's great. It's just that fell apart. So we shouldn't give up on it unless we go, oh no, the project's shitty. And, or we were wrong. It's not worth pursuing. But if they're worth pursuing, it's just kind of keeping them alive, and being patient about them.
Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know there's going to be a lot of happy people after listening to this, just with the news of Stay Alive and a few other things that you've mentioned. For anybody listening, the links to William's socials will be down below, and I'll also include links to Stay Alive, Where, a couple of other things, so you guys can check them out. Like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a little bit of back and forth, obviously, trying to get this figured out. Is my bad, but it's been an absolute pleasure, man.
All right, likewise. It was great. I will talk to you soon.
Evil wears many masks, but pure horror wears only one. Support First Class Horror on Patreon for as little as $1. Can't get enough of the horror? Carve yourself a deal from official merchandise, only on Teespring. Join us on all social media at First Class Horror. We have such sights to show you.